It is the hardest fun I've ever had. That's how I would characterize my last 4 years.
Can you elaborate?
Obviously, it's just a tremendous honor to have been able to serve the children of the state and Oklahomans and to advance just really all the good things about Oklahoma. I came into office at a time with a state with very low expectations. There was a culture of non-accountability, no transparency, low expectations for students. I came in running on a platform of implementing a wide array of reforms. The governor wanted to do that. The legislature wanted to do that. But I also came into office my first year with a major fiscal deficit, and that really made it difficult to get started in the first year. The first legislative session, privately I would be thrilled if we had gotten half of those measures through and continued to work on them. They passed everything, every single reform, and then said, here, implement. And so taking a state from pretty much 0 up to 100 miles an hour takes a lot of work. The department also was one that had almost no executive type leadership, business decision making. It was disorganized. People were working in silos and producing duplicate reports. I had, my first day in office, I had 2 files put on my desk that were that thick, and I was supposed to sign purchase orders for every single thing purchased in the department. So it was inefficient. I was signing something for a $25 ink cartridge. And so we had to put in some, really some business procedures and processes in the department. We had to get people working together cooperatively without being worried about it. The other thing that was absolutely stunning is the way that data was not used, not just ignored, not only that, but not used. Person on my staff said, our job is to collect the data because the law tells us, but Superintendent Garrett doesn't have us do anything with it because she said it's the district's data. And so that is a big part of the culture shift, is getting people to understand how data can empower you to make change. And proud to work, and Governor Fallon wanted to do a lot of modernization of government, and we consolidated some things that we're doing in technology and our data system under the Office of Management and Enterprise Services. It has saved money. It is an efficiency, but that was a heavy lift just in and of itself. But for that, then, we're developing a really wonderful student data information system. And we are now beginning to develop the capabilities of, as I call it, Moneyball. We're doing analytics on that data. Has never been done before in the state. We've got economists that try to interpret some things, but sometimes you need to be able to say, I wonder what if. Probably one of the hallmarks of that is something called our Bright Spots survey. Pretty exciting when you're able to take a look at the performance of a school district and you're able to show how they have improved in their performance, and then be able to show that there's a similar school district of size and demographics and all of that, free and reduced rate, that aren't performing just as well. The power in that is not pointing fingers at the people that are not performing, but it is to say, let me introduce you to the superintendent and the staff of this district that look a lot like you, and let's figure out some ways we can share best practices and peer-to-peer. That alone is powerful. But with that, we're also able to do, I wonder. I wonder if the money they're being given is being spent appropriately. And so for that, for the first time in the state, we're going to have a financial transparency website. It's getting ready to be released. The only thing that's been holding it up really is making sure that everything complies with our student data privacy laws. That's going to come up, and the first phase of that is getting ready to be released next week. The second phase that the Office of Management and Enterprise Services are going to continue to work with is to apply a business analytics software program that is they're getting ready to install and do that. So people will be able to say, wow, we spent this much on reading from the state, the district spent this much on reading. How does that correlate with actual performance? Did the money get into the classroom, and then how did the district use that money? We've never had that capability before, and so now we have that. So we have the data to be able to analyze what we're doing, better business processes. That set us up to then be able to organize this department into a service organization. We have our regulatory requirements. That's right. And that will always be. But I tell folks that are working for me, you have three basic jobs. The first one is regulation. The second one, and the most important one, is service. Service to the districts, professional development, showing them how they can reduce their chronic absenteeism, showing them that indeed 95% of children can learn to read proficiently if they employ systems change and make a top-down approach that is district-wide, that is organized and makes sense to teach kids how to read, that uses just present laws that we have and makes it happen. And so their job is regulatory support, and then the other one is as policy and policy developers and advisors to the legislature. Take the information now we have and be able to apply that appropriately to continue to improve education.
Can you touch on some of those reforms you talked about when you got into office that you implemented?
Yeah. Well, the hallmark of all of them that I have learned over the last 4 years, the single most important reform was the Reading Sufficiency Act, the improvements to the Reading Sufficiency Act. We've had it for about 18 years, now 19. But the requirement of retention in third grade was significant. It generated a tremendous amount of activity and work in the state, and districts woke up and said, wow, if this is really true that we might have to retain third graders in third grade, let's think about reorganizing ourselves and focusing on best practices to make sure that indeed those kids can be successful. And we have seen great improvement in that. We've seen a lot of work through our REACH coaches that directly went out to school districts and got into the classroom level to help teachers improve their practice, to help teachers know how to look at that data that we're now generating and how to adjust instruction to that data. That work is ongoing. It's very, very important. In my view, the addendum to the law passed last year that the governor vetoed and the legislature overrode has bad components to it. But let me break that down for you. It had several components to it. One is that if a child is promoted that is limited knowledge, not unsatisfactory, but limited knowledge, so they're barely able to decode a word, to know cat, mat, hat. If they're moving on to fourth grade, the district is still required to spend a specific amount of time helping that child. That's important. They're not just thrown into fourth grade having to read chapter books and left to their own. Those kids don't do well, not just in Oklahoma, but historically in other states. The data will show that. That is absolutely critical. The other component of it that was very, very good, that I think makes the law actually stronger, was the fact that we are now adding, again, an additional assessment that kids can pass to reach that requirement of that high stakes requirement. So now a child can take something called a benchmark test that is given by the teacher a few times a year. Any time between kindergarten and third grade, if that student meets that benchmark, they've met the high stakes requirement and can be promoted to fourth grade. And they still take the test at the end of the year, but the high stakes component of it is gone. That's important. What gutted the bill, what gutted RSA, what is counterproductive and will never be supportive of children is the fact that they reinstituted these committees. Now, everybody says, oh, the parents should be involved in this. Absolutely. If the parents were involved, they wouldn't be having to discuss the fact that the child failed the test. Parents can be involved in preschool, kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. But in third grade, that's the point at which you have to make sure children are ready to learn, because they can read and read to learn. And so allowing these so-called committees was considered to be one more way to really not do justice to the fact that children must be able to read. What we found is that we've got a lot of evidence showing that many times the committees never met, or the committees, and a child was promoted anyway, or that the committees didn't have their full membership that they needed. We had other parents saying they were confused and they felt pressured to sign the paperwork to promote the child. A few times, though, kids were retained, and that is good. If I were a parent of a third grade child that failed the third grade test, I would then know that my child, if they were promoted to fourth grade, has almost no hope of catching up, almost no hope of being proficient in reading, and that their chances for dropping out of school, their chances for chronic failure, and possibly not even being able to get an education that allowed them to get a job to support their family, their chances at that kind of failure increases dramatically. It is actually cruel to not take time out. We're not talking about repeating third grade. The child didn't flunk science and social studies. The child didn't flunk math. The child cannot read. And so you're not repeating third grade. You need to say, time out. Let's take the time this year to allow this child to have the time and to learn how to read. And it is very effective where it's done in other states. It is the best thing for the child. Reading was the most important. Second to that is the A through F grade card. Never have we seen as much activity in wanting to improve schools as we have through the A through F grade card. Transparency and accountability are absolutely critical to continue to improve our schools. Nobody's pointing fingers. Everybody's just providing information. Indeed, our renewal of our waiver, or reinstitution of the waiver that we have, was not because we have some set of standards that were judged by people that they were college and career ready. USDE just took the language and said, we're doing this because of the work and school turnaround that is occurring. And it's from the A through F grade card. We're constantly getting superintendents calling in and saying, we don't want to be an F anymore, come help us. And they're realizing the amount of assistance that we can give them and increase their capacity to improve. And that's something that's very important. We need to have a strong A through F grade card. Any efforts to roll that back or to weaken that are just not acceptable. At the same time, though, as we look at the data carefully, we need to now shine a very bright light on graduation rates. And that is something that will be addressed in the new waiver application, and in terms of making sure that we don't have schools that are essentially dropout factories but get a B on the grade card. So that's very, very important. Next is the teacher and leader evaluation system. Absolutely critical. You know, one thing we're seeing that as practices are improving through increased improvement in reading and through the A through F grade card, teachers' evaluations, their evaluations are improving. And so we, you know, how are you going to know how to get better unless you know areas where you can grow? And I'm actually quite surprised that teachers think that this is something that's bad, meant to hurt them. This was a system designed to help good teachers become great and struggling teachers become good and continue to improve. It's easy to design a system that is devoted to exiting teachers. That's not what this is about. As a matter of fact, teachers get a very impressive amount of assistance and help and time to continue to improve. But all the other supportive work we're doing in the department to help them increase their capacity is helping them also with their practice within the classroom. Those are the big three reforms. We had some other reforms that were done, but those are the big three that I think are really going to, if they're adhered to and not rolled back, I think they're going to continue to move the state forward.
Can you talk briefly about Common Core? I mean, obviously that's a lightning rod. It has been. Kind of walk me through the genesis or the beginning when
Yeah.
you came into office.
Well, that's actually something that started back in the Reagan days with a nation at risk, and everybody in this country said, we can't compete internationally, and it's time we start paying attention to this, and it always begins with your standards. And so it was agreed upon that the states would get together and begin to write standards in English and mathematics that would cut across the states, would allow, because of the high mobility, would allow that to occur, but also raise the bar to make sure truly that kids were college and career ready. That was done, and Oklahoma did participate in the writing. Regardless of what is said, we did participate in the writing. We had 2 significant opportunities to review them and provide comment. They were adopted by our legislature when I came into office. Excuse me. When I came into office. And they were...
I'm sorry, clarify that. They were adopted before you came into office.
Right.
Okay.
They were adopted by the legislature before I came into office. And so I come into office and we have the Common Core standards. And that is yet one more reform we're supposed to implement. Do all this training of teachers to show them how they're going to shift their practice on top of everything else. And we went about doing that. And as I looked at the standards, I really believed that mathematics was solid. Since then, great input by very serious and excellent teachers have shown me that there needs to be some improvements to it, and that needs to be reflected as the state writes the new standards. And in English was very, very good as well. Again, there's some gaps there that need to be improved, but that's the normal process of taking a look at standards. The problem is that it was a process that became linked to Barack Obama, in that they linked the implementation of college and career ready standards, most likely the Common Core, to being able to get race to the top money. Now, that is unfortunate that happened, because this is something that was written in the George Bush era, and then Barack Obama came in and truly hijacked it. And then they began to talk about increased data gathering. That is not connected to the standards, but they talked about needing more data on students to make judgments and to make policy decisions. I don't think the federal government has a place in doing that, increasing the amount of data that they gather. I'm pretty comfortable that the voluminous amounts of data we have to send to them is quite enough. But as you can tell then, it became linked to some sinister perception of a sinister plot that wants to get control of the minds of our children. It's really irrational, and it's unfortunate. But the folks that did it have nothing more than all of their days just to focus on one thing. And they truly put out misinformation, at times outright lies that they privately admitted to. They pressured legislators. They very effectively organized to let legislators know that unless they voted to repeal the Common Core, that they would have a primary opponent and probably lose their primaries.
Who are you speaking about when you say they, them?
The Rope group, and Jenny White and her group, and various groups. But they were also very effective in doing something else. They created doubt in the minds of reasonable Oklahomans. Grandparents would ask me, now, this talk's kind of crazy, but I'm kind of worried about this Common Core. Are we trying to make automatons out of all of our kids? And business people were saying, it's solid, good, it's right. It's going to get our kids ready for college and career. These are good standards, aren't they? And so I would try to assure them of that, but that doubt was beginning. When I started seeing that second and third level of doubt and the upset that it was creating, I went to the governor and I said, you know, this is such a distraction. I think what we need to do is to simply state that we're going to rewrite our own science and math standards. Let's write Oklahoma standards for Oklahoma's children. Let's make them very, very good, better than what we've got now. The past standards are not adequate. They must be better than what they are now. They've got to teach our kids how to think, not what to think. We have to teach our kids those critical skills they must have to be ready for the 21st century. It is not there right now, and our standards must be improved. The governor agreed with me. It was just too much of a distraction, too much upset. And so legislation went through and we began the process. The process is now starting for writing the standards. So it was a good idea in the beginning, but now we see it as falling apart in other states as well. And this misinformation campaign, this doubt that is created, is really unfortunate. Yes, there are problems with the Common Core, absolutely, that need to be fixed. But to the point of rolling back years of training, the development of materials, support materials for classrooms, that's not appropriate.
And that's what in fact happened.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. It was created a lot of confusion and a lot of upset in the state. I agreed the Common Core needed to go away. But in the bill where they rolled back the Common Core in 3399, that was the number of the bill, I argued to allow us, while the new standards were being developed, to allow us to continue to teach these rigorous English and math standards so you can have continuity. And again, the lobby was just like, if we don't get rid of this, they'll never go away and all of that. I agree. Standards, the Common Core needed to go away. Just give us some time to transition into it. That wasn't possible. So we had to hit a full stop, turn around, and begin to work with what we discovered was a number of teachers and even principals that had never taught the past standards. And that revelation taught us that we needed to go out around the state and do a review of those, but show how they can use more rigorous techniques to teach those in their classrooms. And so we did that. We went to 14 different trainings throughout the state, and it was great professional development for teachers. We are out in the state all of the time, but this was very much focused on how to teach the past standards in a more rigorous fashion. And so controversy's over. The thing I'm concerned about...
Is it over?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's over, except for one thing. There is a move afoot to replace our assessments, our state assessments, that must be aligned to our new standards, to replace them with a very inferior system of testing. Again, this is the transparency and accountability component. If you give a lousy test, it's easier to get an A. It's easier for a school to have a better letter grade. It's easier for all the adults to look great. But the kids aren't served. The kids continue to fall further and further and further behind. This notion of administering the ACT test instead of the end of instruction test is inappropriate. It is not a test to test mastery of subject matter at all. Indeed, one legislator is proposing we install the ACT and make the cut score a 14. You get a 10 if you can write your name. That, to me, is a statement of a lack of confidence in low expectations for what Oklahoma kids can do. It's the same. It's the moral equivalency of the ACT Aspire series of throwing up your hands and saying, well, you can't expect these kids to know this. That's something, I mean, a superintendent I've had various people say, these kids are poor, you can't expect them to learn. And I look at them and I say, they must learn. If they're poor, they must learn. That's the only way out of poverty. If you'll go into a KIPP academy and take a look at those kids, from some of the poorest and most rundown parts of our state and seeing the most difficult things, those kids are being challenged every single day, and every time they're meeting the challenge. Take a look at our turnaround schools that we're having so much success with. They're working their hearts out. The expectations are high, but the kids are meeting the bar every single time. At some point, this state is going to have to look at itself and say, yes, we can do this. It's going to take some hard work, some change. It's going to take some adults feeling uncomfortable about things. But this state is absolutely capable of achieving the best education system in the country. That's what I was devoted to doing. It's just going to take a lot of work and a lot of commitment to get it done.
What's the biggest misconception about you?
That I'm cold and indifferent and don't listen to schools and don't listen to superintendents and principals and don't care about teachers. And that's ridiculous. Immediately after I got into office, I began a process of going out to a minimum a school district a week during the time that school was in session. And that was tremendously helpful, and I maintained that. At times being in 3 school districts a week. It was an opportunity to listen to teachers and superintendents and principals and school board members and parents. Sometimes those talks were contentious because people were afraid. They were afraid of the change, but mostly afraid of their capacity to be able to meet the challenges of that change. And no, it's not because they need more money. It's because they have to fundamentally change their practice and their view of themselves as a capable adult of doing that. I never met a teacher that didn't want the best for their kids. Not once in 4 years did I see a teacher that said, I don't want to do my job well. I don't want my kids to achieve. I met scared teachers who were not given the information that we would send out to superintendents and principals. I can't tell you the number of emails that were bounced back to the department that people didn't even open. We were prohibited from getting teachers' email addresses so we could communicate directly to them because their districts and the teachers union didn't want us communicating with teachers. That's how you dispel rumors. That's how you give facts out. That's how you train and teach people and give them information. They wanted to keep everybody in secret. I would reach out to superintendents. I had a superintendent advisory committee. Pick 60 superintendents from across the state, geographic variation, size of districts. Hardly anyone would show up, maybe half of them. We'd have a meeting. They would complain about the A through F law as though I can arbitrarily change the law. I mean, they wanted me to do things that would ignore the law. And I'm just one of those people, if you're going to write a law, by gosh, it has to be enforced. We just saw this yesterday on the ad valorem issue. Came to my attention, immediately worked to get it enforced. But superintendents somehow thought that I could optionally decide to implement different components of this. We did everything we could to support them and give them the information. It was very rocky in the beginning on the A through F card, and that's because we were still building the student data system. And as we were building it, we still hadn't developed to a fine-tune the individuals working on the system and accountability, the programmers. I mean, it's just a huge group of people. And so we had problems in that. But the other thing I found out, districts weren't keeping their data. We'd ask them to turn in their data, and they'd have a deadline by law. That was considered to be an optional day. I began to enforce those deadlines, and they didn't like it. And that's because you have to collect your data and make sure it's accurate. And what we found is the first year, a great deal of the data wasn't accurate. They simply didn't clean up their data. And so we set in a process by which during the year they would have different times they'd have to put their data in. And they began to realize that if they want a true grade, they better make sure they've got clean and accurate data. It was astonishing that some districts that would turn us in things that we'd spend days and days and days cleaning up their data that was just inaccurate. And so
was it intentionally inaccurate or just?
It was just the culture that I came into. Nobody looked at data. Nobody cared about data. They worked off of impulse and feelings, so why keep it accurate? You're just required to turn in data, but the law doesn't say you're required to turn in accurate data that is actionable. That whole entire atmosphere is now changing. We're getting much better compliance with that on time, but then also we're getting some good clean data, and districts are realizing, wait a minute, now I have actionable data, and I can act on that. So people were mad at me. Superintendents wanted me to optionally implement laws. The state superintendent, can't say, we're going to do a moratorium on testing, or we're going to get rid of this and this and this. Well, no, that's not the purview of the state superintendent. It is to implement the laws that the legislative branch and the governor puts into place. And so we worked with superintendents, tried to give them information. They didn't like what they were hearing. I took a great deal of what they said. We made a lot of changes to policy based on their input. Constantly, we would change policy. We would gather information to constantly try to make things better. I had a small kitchen cabinet, and it became difficult to get people to respond to that. I do appreciate the superintendents that came to that. We had teachers advise us on the development of almost all of our policy. We would have teacher working groups that would come in. I think we had over 300 teachers help develop the teacher and leader evaluation system. But again, they don't want to use student data or objective data about their performance, so they say the system is bad. They're the ones that helped develop it, and indeed put teachers in control of over 65% of the score, personally in control of the results of 65% of their score. But now it is something that is intimidating to them. So there was always time. We had teachers in the building constantly. We did outreach. We did constant feedback, reached out to superintendents, worked with legislators. Some of them didn't like the fact that I was actually implementing the laws, and so they were now getting flack back from their superintendents that, wait a minute, this woman is actually making us do the stuff that you pass, and so they were getting a lot of flack about that. So it's real uncomfortable when you got your superintendent in your district that, it plays a big part in you getting elected, that is saying, wait a minute, I don't like this so much. And it's mostly because they have to change their work, the way they're doing their work. So the legislature didn't quite like that at all. I am a gal that is very plain spoken. I will tell people when I see a problem, because I think adults are supposed to have children's best interest in mind. And those adults then should be motivated to provide the best for those children. I have said it before. Sadly, some districts, some superintendents, some principals, and some teachers are devoted to a march to mediocrity because that's easier. That doesn't require change. But when I do see really the large amount of districts that are working their hearts out every single day and doing absolutely their best, those are the ones that really keep me motivated to keep on working and to press ahead. And there's more of them than there are of the other. I'm happy to say that.
What is your proudest accomplishment?
I don't know if it's my accomplishment, but it's the fact that we're moving forward so well in reading, and the fact that I was able to assemble some very talented people in this department to reach out. I'm not worried about a legacy. I'm going to let history decide that for itself. You're going to hear a lot of bashing of me, and you've heard it through the years, and that's fine. We'll just let history take care of itself. I think Oklahoma began a very serious conversation, and began to admit that we are not performing well at all educationally. And there's a lot of Oklahomans that looked at each other in the eye and said, this won't stand. And the conversation turned into action, and that's beginning to take hold now. It's probably my most proudest moment, is that Oklahomans, I've been contacted by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people since the primary. And they said, we know that the primary was a rigged deal by people devoted to making sure you get out of office. Well, I still lost. You know, if people wanted to support me, they could have voted for me. There's no doubt about it. I lost. But people are saying it really is a tragedy. This state will, they're worried about the state might roll back. And I said, conversation's begun. The cover's been torn off. People are now seeing a real view of what it's really like. You can't put the cover back on. You can't go backwards. It's time for the state to continue to move forward.
And you feel like you were a catalyst.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was proud of that. Absolutely proud. I was elected and given a mandate to reform education in the state. I took that seriously. And this is a 24/7 job. There is no time off. I've had one vacation in 4 years. And it was overwhelming when I came into office. I didn't have the benefit of a quality transition. Came in, and in 2 weeks I had to present my budget, and a budget that was passed by a school board that had an outrageous increase that they asked for. Get ready to work with legislators on a legislative agenda, staff up the department with, get rid of all the old political favorites that were here that were just collecting a paycheck and doing not much else. Reducing the size of government. This agency was overblown with people that were completely ineffective. Get in people that can actually get the job done. We have run very, very lean in the last 4 years. And maybe in retrospect, it would have been better if we could have operated with more individuals to get the job done more effectively. There's, you know, in my reading department, there's 3 people and there's 530 school districts. And so it would have been helpful if we had had more people. But right now, my budget for my department's been flat for 4 years, and I'm now going into extra funds that come up that aren't expended in other areas just to shore up some of that. So it doesn't need to be a huge department, but perhaps some more folks that are focused on helping to implement.
So you talked about all these challenges when you got here. Did you know what you were getting into?
I knew what I was getting into, but I didn't realize how bad it was, how dysfunctional the operations were in the department. I was shocked at the lack of data that was available. Those are normal business types things. I mean, you can't run any company unless you have your data. I was shocked about that. I knew about the low expectations for students, and I just concluded that districts weren't getting the information they needed, and that we needed to make sure they had accurate and quality information. I was shocked though, that at the resistance to actually having the will to change. That was disappointing.
How about your biggest disappointment? Since we've touched on your proudest accomplishment.
I don't know if I'd call, you know, there's things that you wish didn't happen. A disappointment means that, you know, you totally failed at doing something. You know, I would have liked to have gone on another 4 years to fully implement these reforms and continue to improve. So the fact that I can't be here to serve the kids and to focus on that, I'm really concerned about that. And that in itself is a disappointment. I'm not a person that wants power. I would not, if this was an appointed position, I would have tried to get appointed. The only reason I ran is not to be a politician to get a powerful position in the state. It was so I could implement these reforms and help kids. But I am not disappointed at the fact that I'm going to continue to work in education and education reform.
How are you going to do that?
Well, I'm very interested in advancing the cause of education choice. Got to have strong accountability. You know, we had the Alexis Rainbow thing yesterday, and they should be fully accountable, just as school districts must be accountable. But also, parents fundamentally want to decide where they place their children educationally. Parents fundamentally want to know that they have a quality choice to where they're sending their children. And I want to work to continue to advance that. There's some real possibilities in the state that we can get quality choice for parents. Charter schools, through scholarships, taxpayers' scholarships to kids, to families. There's several different ways we want to do that, and I want to advance that. Plus, there's a lot that we've learned, and I have learned personally, and a lot that I'm very, very interested in showing a way that we have come upon a very important thing, and it's our turnaround model that we have. It's getting real results. There's a lot of people nationally that are very interested in it. What we're able to do with very, very low performing schools in using the A through F grade card, and then going into those schools and giving very specific support and building leadership within those schools. One thing I am disappointed about, and I wanted to do in my second term, two things I wanted to do. Number one is to build a solid leadership development program in the state. What we're finding is that our principals and superintendents are ill-equipped to, number one, run a business, but number two, most importantly, to be academic leaders. That's to move this forward, you have to have an academic leader in a building. Our work on school turnaround is focused on building academic leaders. What we've learned through our involvement with the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business and the school turnaround work that we're doing with our districts that are in that and the new ones that will be coming into that this next year, we're finding out that if you have a comprehensive approach to leadership development and systems change from the top to bottom within a district, you can get meaningful reform. I wanted to bring that program to Oklahoma, run a couple cohorts through, bring it to Oklahoma, and through a partnership with one of our universities to develop that program for Oklahoma. It is so effective, and we believe we've really hit on something. Wanted to do that, and I hope that work can continue to go forward. The other thing I wanted to address that I've never gotten to address is the unique environment of middle schools. Our middle school children are almost a little lost generation, or the lost boys of Peter Pan. This is a unique group of kids. I learned a lot about them when I started my first charter school, Independence Charter Middle School. It's a unique age. They're going through tremendous growth, both physically and mentally and socially. They begin to learn differently. They begin to wonder about their futures. And I don't believe it's been given the time and the attention that it deserves. And I wanted to really focus on that in my second term in office.
How confident are you that your successor will continue, the reforms, the work, that you've put forth?
I can hope. I can say lots of prayers, but there's nothing I've heard to date that gives me a lot of hope about that.
Why is that?
My successor ran on a platform of get rid of Janet, but there was no substance to it. And indeed, as she did when she was on the state board and as she's showing now, she has aligned herself with the education establishment. They are in meetings with her or show up in meetings that she should be in and showing up for her. They are closely aligned to her. These are the people that are focused on keeping Oklahoma bad and down in our performance. And she is very tightly aligned with that. I'm disappointed that she's relying on my predecessor for advice, and those that are supposedly supposed to be great leaders in education but are running some of the worst performing districts in the state. And so it is for political expedience. I believe the state has elected a politician. They kicked out a policy geek and elected a politician. And so we'll see how that works.
So what do you think her motivation is if it's not to, better academics, better?
If you're a politician, you're after power and you're after influence. And we'll see how that shakes out.
Now, have you had a chance to talk with her, work with her, transition, work on that sort of thing? You said you didn't have much of a transition.
I had almost nothing at all. We set up a very robust transition plan for her. Nothing based on politics, just teaching her the inner workings of what it takes to do this job. All the people that are advising her, The only thing I can assure her is rarely do they get their facts straight. And it's because they are not in command of all of the information. There are just technical things she needs to learn. For instance, this tax thing, this ad valorem thing. She needs to understand the rudimentary requirements of assessment development, of how you derive accountability. That's our heating system. That's our expert boiler system. Yeah, welcome to state government. There is nuts and bolts things that have nothing to do. Didn't want to talk politics with her. I knew she and I didn't share the same politics. I'm a conservative and she definitely is not. And so didn't want to talk politics, but she needs to know the rudimentary components of the teacher and leader effectiveness and how you develop a value-added score and what the different components of that are and how teacher comes to those positions. I wanted her to really understand reading and the theory behind all of the work that we're doing in reading, so she could understand that. Anybody that listens to it and listens to our systems change approach says, absolutely, that's what we want, 100%. When do we get started? And to get a chance to do that. She needs to get an understanding really of state law and the requirements of state law and how all that works, not what somebody's advising her. At some point, the door's going to close and she's going to have to govern. And she can't do it through text messages advising her what to say all of the time. She's got to have the information. We've had her here for 3 very short sessions where she just got the most rudimentary things out of our instruction department. We designed a system of 31 hours of a lot of close work on this, and we're willing to provide all of that information, and she hasn't availed herself of it.
Time for probably one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry. God, Phil.
45 minutes, Bob.
He's having fun. He hasn't had an interview like this in a long time.
You know what, I wanted to ask you, you said one more, can I have 2 more? I'll make them.
Okay, 2 more.
Sure.
2 more, thanks.
Just because you're low.
So, you talked a little bit about the primary, you finished 3rd. How do you think that happened? You kind of gave me a little
Yeah.
glimpse of how you think that happened, and maybe you can expand on that.
Approximately 13,000 educators changed their party affiliation and voted Republican. But that's not the only thing. When a teacher is not given information about the reading law, when a teacher thinks that they're going to be fired under a teacher evaluation system simply because the information hasn't been given to them by their district and by their principal and their superintendents, teachers get scared. They tell parents, they hear the talking points. Well, this is 1 test, 1 day. No child should be upset and throw up on a test. The adults cause that, not the child. When I see that teachers that prepared their kids said, no sweat, no problem, we did great. Their kids did very, very well. So those teachers get concerned and they tell parents, you know, she's putting a lot of requirements on us. Like I made up the law. There are literally teachers that think I made up the law. They think that I made up all the assessments that they have to give in their districts. I had a teacher come to me and she said, you know, she invited me to her, she sent me an email and said, if you could just be in my classroom and see what I experience every day with my 4th graders, you'd have a different attitude. And I said, have you got time Friday? I'll be there Friday. And I walked into her classroom and she was dumbfounded. Spent some time with her. She held up a piece of paper and showed me a whole raft of tests that she gives. And she said, why do you mandate all these tests? And I said, I don't. And neither does the state, neither does the law. And she looked at me, she goes, I don't believe you. And I said, there's 2 tests on that list that the state mandates. I said, it's this English and it's this mathematics. She said, what are you talking about? And I said, all the rest of it is decided by your district. Go see your principal and your superintendent about the rest of them. You've got to have you have to gather information about how kids are doing. And so those teachers would say that to parents. This woman is making your kids take 15 tests over a 3-month period, major tests. This woman is making me go through a bunch of paperwork. We require almost no paperwork of teachers. Their districts do. And so parents begin to think I'm something that's evil. The grandparents begin to worry. They're told that I don't listen to anybody and everything's an upset, so Oklahomans begin to doubt. I knew I had an uphill climb when I decided to run again. 6 months before I ran, I was told that I had almost no chance of winning. I still spent the time, pardon me, in the money
I want to offer you
to
some
advance.
water.
Yeah.
You're talking
Can I have my
about-
coffee? I'm getting over like a major flu, and I'm still coughing and hacking. Like yesterday at the meeting, I started coughing. What was I saying?
You
Damn,
were
I'm
talking about
old.
6 months before.
Oh yeah, I was told I had virtually no
chance.
chance of winning. But I decided to spend the time and the money because I wanted to advance the conversation and to let Oklahomans know what is possible for their children. That it's not time for us to throw up our hands and to go backwards. That that's not the choice.
Well, that leads me to my last question here. What do you hope for the public school children of Oklahoma going forward?
I believe in teachers. I strongly believe in teachers. They're great people, and they believe in their kids. Almost every single one of them believe in their kids. When you've got that, you've got the core of what is needed to help children improve. I believe Oklahoma kids are just as worthy of a quality education as any child anywhere else in the world. The fact that we are not delivering it day after day gnaws at me. The fact that we have the potential to do that spurs me on to keep working. The faith that Oklahomans have in themselves and in their state lets me know that it is possible. We're just going to have to all be devoted towards that. So it is, I'm a very spiritual person, and I pray a great deal. I pray for every child in the state, and I pray for every teacher, and I pray for every educator and their parents, and knowing I know all of the challenges for parents, for teachers, and for school districts and all of that. But I continue to pray constantly, and there's a woman that I read a lot. Her name is Ann Voskamp. And my favorite quote from her is, "The joy is in doing what doesn't seem possible, because that's the point at which fear meets faith in the face of God." This is about allowing Oklahoma's kids to reach the full potential that God intended them to have. He gave them life, and He gave us our children. And our job is to do everything we can to show Him how beautiful His gift was. That's what I'll keep focused on.